It's 4 o'clock in Los Angeles. It's 6 o'clock in Chicago. And it's 7 p.m. in New York City. Hello, everybody. I'm Mad Dog DeCipio. This is What's the Buzz, America's Best Podcast. Joining me tonight, God help me, she's back again, Amelia, the Pitbull Chapman. How are you, Amelia?
Good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. What have you been up to?
Nothing. Just trying to deal with all this rain here in Florida.
Yeah, you guys are floating away.
I know, right?
Man, I'm going to tell you, we got another handsome guy with us tonight.
Yes.
Besides myself, I thought I was the only sex symbol on the show tonight. I want to introduce everybody to a Pulitzer Prize winner. Our first Pulitzer Prize winner on the show. We've got Academy Award winners that have been with us, Emmy Award winners, Nobel Peace nominees, not winners, but nominees.
Yes.
But we've never had a Pulitzer Prize winner. His name is Dan Luzadder. And let me tell you, and I hope, Dan, I'm pronouncing that right.
It's what I always answer to.
Well, there you go. God bless you.
Welcome to the show.
Let me tell everybody about Dan, because he is a fascinating guy. He's our kind of guy, Amelia. I could already tell you we're going to probably have him back, because we're no way going to get into everything tonight. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you about Dan Luzadder. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He's written for the New York Times. He's written for the Daily News and has authored an amazing array of works, some of which we will talk about tonight. Getting into his work, trust me, folks, you got to open up the archives to do it, because there's a lot of stuff there. In an over 40-year career, he's distinguished himself through the deep dives into human trafficking issues, international drugs, Columbine. That was we're going to talk about that tonight, because I got a couple questions about that.
Sure.
For which he was the Pulitzer nominee. Until recently, he was a paid independent executive editor for Freedom Magazine, published by, of all people, the Church of Scientology. His works include Street Talk, The Slant, we're going to get into that one tonight, and The Manchurian Journalist. Ladies and gentlemen, Pulitzer Prize winning author, Dan Luzadder. Dan, welcome to the show.
Yes,
Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Dan, let's get right into this. One of the things that endears your writing to me is the fact that it's painfully real and gritty. And you know what I'm talking about. It's I imagine you. This is just how my head works, because I'm a little crazy. Neil, you shut up. I imagine you the guy with the trench coat, the hat, the little stubby pencil with the notepad, sneaking in and out of crevices, getting the story. How far off am I?
Well, I mean, if that's the cliche, I'm a pretty cliche guy, I guess. I don't know if I ever had a fedora with a press card in it in the hat room, but I certainly had a trench coat at one time or another. Probably wore it out on assignments. I don't know.
There you go. But that's, I imagine, the scoop reporter. You are a guy who has ruffled a few feathers in your time. And I like that about you. I really like that about you. On this show, and those people who listen and watch the show, and there are a considerable number, will tell you that we are as anti-establishment as you can get, particularly with regards to what the media feels like they want to feed us at the time. I am an avid freedom of speech advocate, to the point where I have had the president of FIRE join us. That's the free expression, free speech group, national group called FIRE. Joe Cohn was here, and guys like he and you are cut from the same cloth. Get the story, get the truth, no matter the cost. And it's cost you some friends, it's cost you some jobs. So, Dan, let me into your head, into your world. The job of the freelance journalist, is it still a thing?
Is it still a thing? You can still make a living as a freelance journalist. And in fact, there are probably more opportunities for freelancers than there used to be. But it's the kind of freelancing that you might be doing that's a little more difficult than than what you might expect. To, you,
Right.
if you're going to make a living at freelancing, you've got to do some things that are fairly high profile, and you've got to
Yeah.
some people that can afford to pay for some freelance work.
One of the things that I had a chance to do is I picked, and I was able to get it, thankfully. I picked up a copy of Street Talk, which I really enjoyed because it is more or less a collection or an assortment of columns you've written.
Right.
And it's not, a quote book unquote per se, in that it's, there are lots of different stories. I enjoy that kind of writing. I like to read that kind of publication. A friend of mine just wrote a book in that same vein. Jerry Jewell, dear friend of mine, that's an actress, and she wrote a book similar to yours in that it was, columns that she had written for Disability Magazine. Some very poignant, some humorous. And I found the same thing to be true in your work. There was quite poignant work, some disturbing stuff to read, some humorous, but I will say, in the interest of full disclosure, folks, without giving the book away, Dan Luzadder has a wicked sense of humor. And yes, you do. So, talk to me about your sense of humor in writing this book.
All right. All right.
Go ahead.
That's a really good question, actually, because I spent 7 years as a columnist writing 3 times a week, and that can tax you a little bit if you like to be out on the street and write about things that are real, which I like to do. So every now and then, as deadlines were running short, and as I was always on the lookout for something, I'd fall back on a humor column, and I created some characters that were based on real people and real conversations. But I was around a lot of people who had good sense of humor and were fun to write about, and so I would craft these humor pieces out of various bits of things that were going on in my own life, and that was kind of fun.
Dan, do you almost have to have a sense of humor writing the way you do and the particular subject matter that you do? I mean, I don't know what it's like to write like that. I've written 2 books, but very different kind of work. My books were on psychic phenomena. By profession, I'm a psychic. So, and that's what I do. And you already get the skeptical mind going.
Well, actually, I have a story of my own about that. So,
oh, good. We'll get into that tonight. I want to ask you about how much is too much humor, and when do you say, all right, we got to tighten up the reins here, Dan, and and start getting serious?
Well, humor's interesting and important, I think. And if you have a knack for doing that kind of thing, I think it comes out in your writing as you begin to explore who you are as a writer. I always listen to people talk about things like that, about who you are as a writer. Who I was as a writer was basically someone who was extremely curious about the world and who looked for stories in places where people didn't normally look for stories. And that was what got me into that gritty environment, the blue collar world, the life of crime behind the police lines, the everyday things. And so when you're living with a diet of that stuff and you're seeing humanity up close and in all its pleasant and unpleasant sides, I think you look to humor a bit to lighten the mood or to lighten the feeling. And so I would always try, even if I was writing something serious and I was detailing what I had seen or felt at the moment, I always, I think, had that a little bit of humor behind me to step back a bit and treat the world as maybe ironic as opposed to dangerous.
Dan, you've written a lot of books. I mean, not a lot of books, but you've written a lot of articles. You've written a considerable number over the last 40 years, a considerable number of works, some of which I'm sure most of which I'm sure you're very proud of. There has to be that one or two stories you've written that have either affected you deeply, profoundly, and or personally, or that you wish you'd had not written. Let's take both scenarios.
Well, I'd be hard pressed, I think, to name a story that I wish I had not written. Although some of them have been, as you say, have come with a personal toll. And the way I approach journalism, I pretty much lived it day to day. And I was always working with sources. I was always looking for that interesting story. I started out as a police reporter when I was a teenager. I was still too young to take a legal drink. At the end of the shift, I would grab a bundle of newspapers off the press, and I would go down and drop them off at the places I'd stopped during the night on police beat. And I'd always pick city detectives to go to last, because when I brought a bundle of papers and dropped them on the desk, they'd pull out a bottle of whiskey and pour a shot for everybody in the room, including the teenage kid that brought the paper. It was that kind of exposure to those kinds of environments that really made me want to write about kinds of things like that and those experiences. And that I leaned on that very heavily from the time I was doing that until I was decided that being a columnist didn't create a big enough bang. And that's when I turned to investigative reporting.
Well, that's a great segue, Dan. Is it cathartic for you?
Yes.
The writing?
It is. It's, I've done long-term projects that are of different lengths. Some take months, some have taken years, as with the Manchurian Journalist, this book most recently.
We're going to get into that one big time tonight. Yeah.
And so there is a moment where you come to know that you have the story, where everything is pinned down, and where you come to that moment of trying to describe it in a way that brings the reader along and makes it live for them.
Yeah.
And so in the process, you exhaust that, the angst or whatever angst came with the gathering of the information, I think.
Amelia.
Yes.
Questions, young ladies, for Dan Luzadder.
Yes, you said that you started writing as a teenager. Who was your inspiration that got you into writing?
I had several encouragements along the way, but interestingly enough, when I was a sophomore in high school, growing up in a gritty little industrial town, they didn't bother to teach you much more than how to handle a wrench, and they certainly didn't include grammar in the events that were important. So when I got into high school, I was flunking my English class. And my mother thought that was a bad idea. She sent me to a tutor, an English professor at the local college. And she spent about 3 weeks trying to teach me the fundamentals of grammar. And finally, she threw up her hands. She said, "You're too thick-headed to ever learn this stuff. You just go out and go write something in this notebook I'm going to give you, and I'll teach you how to fake the grammar." I said, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea." So I went out and I wrote it. I wrote about something about walking along the beach. I brought it in, and she sat down, and as she read it, she started to cry. I thought, "Oh my God, I've totally ruined her day. I must be the worst student she ever had." But instead, she said, "Don't ever let anybody try to teach you grammar again. Just go write." And that's what I did.
Wow. Go ahead, Neil.
Yes, and if you had not been a writer, what other career had you chosen along the way?
I don't think there was any other career. When I was a kid, I gathered racing magazines, and I read everything there was to know about auto racing, and I thought I could be a race driver when I grew up. But none of those opportunities seemed to present themselves, and I got steered in another direction.
Oh.
Wow. Racing. My brother-in-law's a race driver.
Really?
I want to talk to you about. There's a couple things we got to get into. We have to talk about, and I'm captivated by this book, The Slant, and I want to talk about this. It's important to me, particularly The Slant and Manchurian Journalist. They kind of, at least the way I read them, they're almost like companion pieces, Dan.
Well, actually, they're the same book. More or less. But the Manchurian Journalist had another publisher at one time, and that was the title that they wanted to use. Over the course of working with them, we came up.
Well, that makes sense then why they were so similar.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Okay, that explains that.
And so it's been a little difficult.
Okay, good night, folks.
It's been difficult to get that prior publisher to pull that back from Amazon, so it keeps showing up. But I changed publishers. The book was back to its original title, The Manchurian Journalist, and we went from there with that.
I want to get into this a little bit. You either, and when did that book begin for you? I want to put a time frame here. There's a reason I'm doing this.
Okay. Well, I was doing a lot of research into the issue of the media coverage of the Church of Scientology. And I did that. And that's where I started with the church. And Freedom Magazine was doing a freelance piece for them on looking at that media coverage. And their argument was that the coverage had been biased, had been colored by a lot of celebrity tabloidism and that sort of thing. So as I was looking at that, I made my recommendation about what I thought it was. I wrote a story for them. In the end, they didn't publish it, but what they did do is they asked me to keep looking. And about that time, Lawrence Wright, the writer for the New Yorker and author of the Looming Tower, the book on Al Qaeda that won the Pulitzer Prize in 2007 on terrorism, he had written a book about the Church of Scientology. And I began to look into his book and examine it for accuracy and the things that the church claimed were wrong with it. My understanding with the church was that any question I asked them, if they were going to take a stand on something, they needed to document it. And so they did that. And as I was looking at the contrast between how he had reported about the church, I started looking at his background to know a little bit more about him. And I read a memoir he had written about becoming a conscientious objector. And then I decided to take a look at the accuracy of those stories. And I discovered something that I did not expect to find. And that was that he had ties to an intelligence network that had been developed after World War II to propagandize and to promote certain Western cultural ideas. And that he had participated not only directly in some of those programs, but the man who served as his father's boss and close friend, a man named Robert Story, was instrumental in creating those programs through funding secretly through foundations and programs like that. So I spent
interesting. It's interesting stuff because what I'm seeing today play out in real time in 2024 are much of the same kinds of mechanisms you wrote about in the Manchurian Journalist. We're seeing, it's all, you must have been a prophet in your time because it's like, Dan Luzadder, saw the writing on the wall, the fake news media before we had a name for it. And so, where I'm going with this, it's a real albatross around my neck. It's the last, let's just be honest about it. It's the last bastion of freedom, the press. If we have not a free press, it's total anarchy at this point. Look around you. You can't find, let's put it this way, Dan, and I think you'll agree with me. You would be very hard pressed to find a truly unbiased, unabridged writing or journalistic piece that was completely fair down the middle today. You can't find one. Everybody's got an agenda, a slant, to use the book title. They all have some other modus operandi and some other other motive, essentially. Where do we find our independence in the press anymore?
Well, as you look at this, so the situation that we're in today, where we have turned, most of us, I think it's fair to say, have turned to television for the majority of our news, or to social media for those who don't watch television much, and outside the group don't.
A scary thought, Dan.
But what we see in the national media reporting about things of a national interest generally. And so every story or every theme has to be tied, no matter which city it's from, which part of the country it's from, has to be tied to that common national interest. So we wonder, how did we get such polarized press where mostly it seems like the various media outlets are either arguing to the left or to the right. They're not down the middle. We look for the closest thing we can find to it, which may be something like Scripps News, or something that's reporting on stories that are not so politically charged, perhaps. But for me, just like any other investigative sort of approach, for me, I want to know, how did we get here? What were the paths? What were the paths that brought us to this point? And I think we have to look back into, journalism's history and journalism's role as the fourth estate in democracy, in being able to make things known to the public that are needed to be known. So if you look back in the rise of newspapers in the early part of the development of the country, there were many newspapers and many outlets, and in some places in many languages. But we gradually homogenized that into larger papers with more power, more circulation, more money, et cetera. And the newspapers became the foundation for the journalism we have. That's where the institutional knowledge came from. Yeah. And that's the system I came up in. But as the corporate takeovers occurred in the 80s and the 90s, where local owners of newspapers and radio stations, TV, were gobbled up by these interests that like the percentage of profits, we lost that local interest and the importance.
Man, I'll tell you what, boy, you are. I tell you what, you're preaching to the choir here. Dan, you remember when the Sunday newspaper was this thick?
I delivered a few of those when I was a newspaper boy.
Now, first of all, you'd be hard pressed to find a newspaper, and if you do, it's about 4 or 5 sheets. That's it.
Right. Or this right here.
And this is today's newspaper right here. I have a problem with that. I asked Joe Cohn, the president of the Free Speech Foundation. I asked him. I said, Joe, how did we get so far off the rails with freedom of the press, freedom of speech? How did this? To your question, Dan? How did we get here? And he answered very simple, very, very eloquently and very simply. He said, nobody was looking. Nobody was looking. Everybody was looking elsewhere, Dan. They weren't looking. You think you're going to find news on here? No. You're not going to find news in social media. It's not designed to give news. That's my contention. This is not news. It's bullshit.
It's more like crowd rumor.
It's fake news.
Thank you. Remember what William Randolph Hearst said. When the rumor is greater than the story, print the rumor. He said that. You can't make it up. He said it.
Well,
Yes.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
Our journalism, is not as vigorous as it could have been, and it has its own peculiar history. And I remember working for medium-sized newspapers in different places around the country, where one of the rules was that you didn't write bad things about the people that bought grocery store ads. You didn't write bad things about the car dealerships.
No.
And fortunately, there weren't that many bad things to write about the grocers or the car dealerships.
There you go.
So you can live with that. But later on, it became more directed as to what the news might be. And in the days that I came up, reporters were selecting what stories to pursue. They were basing that on sources and things they learned. Now we're in an era where editors are deciding what stories should be pursued and assigning someone.
And that's a scary thought, brother.
Scary.
That's a scary thought. Can we talk about the mindset of these editors, Dan? But before we do, I want to do this break from our sponsor. We will be right back, folks, after a word from manscaped.com. Do you have sweaty balls or volleyball netty balls? It's time to make them ready balls. The manscaped.com Lawnmower 3.0 will do the job and clean your knob with its patented no-nick head, so your head will function as desired. Enter promo code Wrestling Future for a generous 20% discount. That's enter Wrestling Future for a 20% discount. Manscaped.com and Wrestling with the Future, going balls to the walls with Manscaped.com and the Lawnmower 3.0. Your balls will thank you, and so will we. We are back with Pulitzer Prize winning author Dan Luzadder. When last we left off, I'm sorry you had to see that, Dan, but they are a sponsor.
I know.
Amelia loves that commercial.
I do
She's got the hots for that chubby fella there.
Yeah.
But I want to talk to you about the mindset of the editor. Today's editor is not the, it's not the Perry King editor of days gone by, or or even God, what was his name? The Daily Planet. What the hell was his name? Anyway, but he's not the same editor he was. He's not the grizzled old vet. Right. He's a young college guy, wearing a polo shirt. He's maybe 30, 34, 35 years old, right?
Right.
He's got a different mindset, a different mentality. Does that bother you, Dan, as much as it bothers me? Because I don't think a guy like that has enough life experience to be an editor.
But I think you've hit that right on the head. And that's also true of a lot of younger reporters. Now, all reporters, in my experience, started out fairly young, and they grew into the business. And if they loved it like I did, they stayed with it, and they continued to develop, and they learned things along the way.
Yeah.
And one of the things you learned was how important beats are and beat structures to developing news as news sources. Otherwise, you get handouts, you get press releases from local government as to what, and they're telling you what the news is, which is not a good thing. So no. I can tell you a story, and it goes back to Columbine. That kind of speaks to exactly that particular issue. Mm-hmm. And I had been, as doing tough stories, I often ran into problems with editors who didn't agree with my approach or whatever. We had ethical disputes, but I'd done that with one of the stories. I'd refused to put my byline on something, and I wound up being assigned to cover the State House, the Colorado State House, because that was a kind of a double secret probation sort of assignment, because I wanted to be doing investigative reporting. So I was there when Columbine happened.
Yeah.
And that day, that really terrible day, I was in the halls of the State House wandering around and talking to lawmakers.
Yeah.
But reporters from around the city were being called by the Rocky Mountain News, where I worked, to come into the newsroom. But I didn't get a call. I wasn't brought back to the newsroom, and nobody called me about the story at all. And I watched what was unfolding around me there at the State House. But The second day and the third day went by, and then I got a call from the city editor, who was one of those who was younger and hadn't been around all that long. And he said, "We've got a problem."
Oh boy.
I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Well, we've let police beats slide, and we haven't had anybody covering Jefferson County Sheriff's Department for quite a long time. And the Denver Post has kept their police beat up to date, and they're getting access, and we're not." I said, "What do you want?" He said, "I want you to find out who's running the investigation. Nobody will return our calls."
Oh
said,
boy, have we been there, Amelia?
Yes.
All right. So,
oh man, we've been there.
So I had done a series of stories on organized crime trying to take over the Denver taxi industry. And in the course of that, I found that the taxis were being used to run drugs and guns.
Oh,
Yeah,
So
Jesus.
I developed some sources in the underground gun community. And so I started calling ex-informants for the cops in the gun community and asking them what the police were trying to find. And I found a guy who told me that they were looking to see where the guns that the kids had used in the killings had come from. And I said, "What do they think?" And he said, "I can't tell you." He said, but there was a gun that was used to kill a Jefferson County Sheriff's deputy, and I think you'll find the guns came from the same place as that gun. So
Wow.
I looked up who the detective was that investigated the officer's killing, and I left him a message on his voicemail because you couldn't get through. I said, "Where'd the gun come from used to kill Officer Mossbrucker? And please call me at the Rocky." About 15 minutes later, I got a call from John Kickbush. He was running the Columbine investigation. He said, "You ask a question of my deputy. I want to know why." I said, "Meet me for coffee and I'll tell you." And so I met him for coffee, and from then on, I was on the inside of the investigation. And that
remarkable.
Wow.
a testament to how important it was to keep police beat up and to keep the beats going and to generate news on a day-to-day basis, something they'd let slide even then.
Amazing.
Wow.
It just blows my mind. I will tell you, one of the things that we do here at this show, and thankfully we are fiercely independent. We are beholden to no one except one sponsor who lets us do whatever the fuck we want, including say fuck. We have no language parameters, thank you. But one of the things that Amelia, we've been together for a couple of years doing this.
Yes.
And I've been here a lot longer than she has.
Yes.
One of the things, Dan, that I have run up against, and Amelia and I together have run up against, is having certain entities telling us essentially, be careful what you say, be careful who you mention. They're listening. Good. I want them to.
Yes.
I want people to. I don't care if you're government people. I don't care if you don't give a shit either way. If you're listening, good. I want you to listen, because my message is equal for everyone. I love my country, but I hate my government. I've said that a million times.
Oh, yes.
One of the things that I treasure more than any single right is the right to free speech and expression. That to me that's paramount. I cannot even express to you verbally how important that is. And a guy like you're my hero. I'm not even playing when I say this.
No. Yeah.
You're my hero. Guys like you that lay it out there, that lay it all out there. Guys like people like Amelia and I that aren't afraid knowing what might be over our shoulder. Yeah, it's a very small club, Dan.
Yes.
It's a really small club. I want you to talk to me about how that club has gotten smaller or larger in your circles. Talk to me and the rest of our 13.5 million subscribers about. Yeah, and we have again, we're very grateful to have the audience we do. Go ahead.
I would say, Angela, that circle has gotten smaller. I think there have always been issues with major stories, perhaps, and how they're presented. There are myths within our history that we have subscribed to because they've been taught to us by the media over time. But there has also been a lot of great reporting on a lot of great subjects, and it's been honest and it's been helpful, and it's helped us, I think, hang on to the democracy that we're hanging on to at the moment
by a thread.
But may well be by a thread or less. But the opportunity to speak out credibly and to do that with documentation so that you can point to what is the truth, and then getting the audience or the platform for that to be heard. I think that circle has definitely gotten smaller. And so
absolutely.
I don't think it has disappeared. I see examples. I see bright lights out there every so often. I'm in Oregon now. There was a small weekly paper in Portland where a reporter took a look at unreported campaign finance sources for a high-level government official in the state and discovered improprieties. And that little weekly campaigned in its stories to make that public. And eventually they brought down that state official that had compromised their own integrity by taking undisclosed contributions. So there are things like that in journalism still going on, but they're not widespread. We've lost the vigor. And so we don't, I would say journalism is sort of on life support, if you will.
Well, I was about to ask you, Dan, and that's a great segue into my question, because I literally was going to just ask you, have we seen the last bastion of independence? And if we haven't, where will it rise like the phoenix from the ashes? Is independent journalism? I know there are plenty of independent journalists.
Right.
How independent they are is a matter of who they're associated with. Because if you're a freelancer, let's be honest about it. The freelance journalist isn't really a freelancer, not if he wants a paycheck every week. And you know exactly what I'm saying, because you're smiling. And let's talk about that. Because, freelance journalism used to be predicated upon getting the story in, being the first with the story, getting it on time, validating the sources, making sure that your I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and what you're reporting is what happened.
Yeah.
That's gone. That shit sailed. So go ahead, Dan.
I would say it's not entirely gone. I think there are still.
Give me some hope, Dan.
I do want to give you some hope. I want there to be hope, because I think without good journalism, we don't have democracy, and if we don't have democracy, we'll have no journalism at all. But
amen.
But I think that there are some efforts out there by journalists who still believe in the standard. I don't think you can kill the beating heart of free expression and journalism, because I think that is part of who we are. People want to tell the truth. Some people don't want to tell the truth because they can profit from lies. And so the misinformation and disinformation for the purposes of personal or group gain or whatever is something different. That's public relations. But journalism is supposed to be about a critical look, a skeptical look of what is, no matter whether you're on the left or the right or down the middle. Journalists have to be skeptical, and they have to go look for the answers that go beyond what people have to say. We're in a he said, she said world, and that suddenly creates our reality somehow. We need to look behind the he said and she said, and it's who said and how was it said. And
I got news for you, Dan. If you're the he and the he said, she said, you're fucked, brother. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Am I lying?
No, you're not.
Please
No.
tell me if I'm making any of this up.
No.
No.
It's it really is so hard to get that fair balance anymore.
Mm-hmm.
CNN, for at least to their credit, they're trying. MSNBC doesn't even pretend anymore. They don't even pretend to be biased. I mean, they're a Democrat could shit on their soundstage and they don't care because they're all about that. Fox News on the other end of the spectrum are so far to the left, they make the right look normal.
Mm-hmm.
But people like me, I consider myself moderately, in the center, and I really am, kind of like I want to be in the center. I want to see both sides, but what I'm seeing from both sides is so disturbing, so callously disturbing. I'll use that word, that it makes you like not give a shit anymore.
Well, when you can't determine what's credible and what's not,
that's it.
You have nowhere to turn except to your own research and your own efforts to understand what's going on. We talk a lot about the political coverage and the political reporting and what is bent one way or the other, but it goes deeper than that. I think it goes into how we are approached by media that includes entertainment media and advertising media.
Yeah.
And so that we believe certain things in certain ways because there are these powerful media voices that present them to us. And so I think in some ways we pay attention to the wrong kind of reporting. I think what's really important is for reporting on the Astoria, Oregon City Council to be done by a reporter working for an outlet where that reporter has knowledge of what's going on. I think it's more important for there to be local reporters out there detailing the everyday lives of people in their community, because that's where our record of history is. And that's part of what we've lost with newspapers is this record of history, the mundane reporting of events and the time frame in which they occurred. Now, as you go back to try to find that, with newspapers gone, publishing 3 days a week, a smaller news hole, you don't find the depth of community knowledge that once existed there.
Yeah.
I can go back 40 years into old newspapers and find stories that are relevant to something I'm writing today. But
brother, I'm going to tell you what, you just spoke my language in such a prolific way. We are doing a series of shows on the Kennedy assassination in about 2 weeks, couple of weeks here. And the information available, the information available regarding the Kennedy assassination is become scarcer and scarcer to find because it's being replaced with the narrative that the government wants you to believe. The internet is being scrubbed at a rate of something like, and I want to make sure I get this right because I have it down here.
Yeah.
YouTube alone, Dan, is being scrubbed at the rate of 1.3 million videos daily.
Really?
Daily. Okay.
I wasn't familiar with that.
Yeah, that's the truth. The Google search engine is being scrubbed at 10 million words an hour on average. Okay. The narrative is being replaced by the narrative they want you to believe. You can't find. I'll give you, Amelia. Tell me, please, if I'm bullshitting. A year ago, we did a show on the Zodiac killer in California.
Yes.
Okay. We had all of our photos, our videos, all this stuff. Okay.
Correct.
A year later, we went to revisit the Zodiac. Amelia and I did a show called Revisit the Zodiac.
Yes.
Amelia, tell me if I'm lying. Could we find anything?
No.
Thank you.
No, we could not find
Gone.
anything. Gone.
Everything that we had was gone.
Mhm.
Which it wasn't even available to nothing.
Nothing.
Everything's been redacted. Photos have been blurred. Everything that we had. Thankfully, we had the original show.
Yes.
Because what I had to do, Dan, I literally had to go back to my own show.
And we take all the videos and pictures.
Yeah, to get the photos and videos.
Mhm.
And this is the kind of bullshit that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
In my realm, and I consider myself a journalist.
Mhm.
You know, Amelia,
Yes.
you are up. Questions for Dan?
Have you ever had anything that was like when you written an article said, okay, we're going to replace it with this, or you have to leave this out, and then before we publish it, and then you told yourself, forget it, I'm not going to do it after all, then you can leave
Now,
me out of
Amelia,
it?
let me interrupt for just a second, Amelia. Are you referring to like censorship?
Yes, like
Okay,
censorship
I
of
just
your
want to
article.
make sure that we
and
know
then-
what we're talking about here.
and
Go
then
ahead.
said, forget it, I'm not going to do it, then you can forget my article, I'm not replacing it with this. And
Well, I did get into a fight like that at the Rocky Mountain News. I had a team of reporters working with me, and we were doing an investigation into the national accounting industry.
oh wow.
And we were looking at the
Oh,
accounting
man.
industry's influence on tax policy and things like that.
Oh,
And we were looking
much
for
time you got?
shenanigans. We were looking for shenanigans within the accounting industry. Well, we found a few.
oh,
Imagine that.
And I traveled the country for quite a while doing interviews on this. And then an editor for the paper brought in an outside consultant to work with us on the story. And I said, well, I don't think that's a great idea. I think we need to keep this in-house. And the
All right.
individual was a lawyer and a CPA, but the editor thought this was a great idea. So I turned around and did a full-bore investigation on the person that was being asked to join. And he had something of an axe to grind against the accounting industry.
Oh, imagine that.
And he called up sources and expressed his opinion to them before we could get him separated. So I refused to put my byline on the story. And I said, I'm not doing this anymore. They made us write the story anyway, but it wouldn't be published without my byline because it wouldn't have held together. So,
I have a question regarding that, Dan, right after this break. We'll be right back.
Jess wanted to start a business when something surprising happened.
Today I'm going to teach you how to crochet.
She started crocheting, like a lot. And her friends noticed.
Jess, you need to sell those.
So she signed up for Shopify and started building her business.
Yes, I love that.
And after a lot of hard work, this happened.
Oh my gosh, I just made my first sale!
You see, every day, hundreds of businesses get their first sale on Shopify.
We got ding!
And the next could be you. So when you're ready to bring your idea to life,
and become your own boss,
build it on Shopify.
I'm Matt Dr. Scipio. We are back with Dan Luzadder, Pulitzer Prize winning author Dan Luzadder. Dan, when last we left off, I was about to ask you a question regarding the byline, the power of the byline. There were, I grew up reading newspapers by people like Roscoe Wells and Jack Anderson and names that became household names. Now you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who's got that kind of stroke anymore.
Yeah.
Does the byline still wield any power?
Well, I think it does, depending on where you are. If you're writing for the New York Times or you're writing for the Washington Post or maybe the Los Angeles Times, you may see the byline has some power. I think one thing the byline does is it does something behind the scenes. It identifies you as to who you are, and so when you call sources and people you don't know and want to talk to them, they can tell you're legitimate. You have some history. You've been able to write stories, put your name on them at the risk of whatever consequences that might bring. So, but the byline to me was it was something important as I was coming up in journalism. I still remember with great detail the first banner byline I got in a daily newspaper, and I can remember the detail of how that occurred and what the story was about. So
Wow.
it's always been. I think the byline was something that they gave you instead of the money, right?
Well, you know what? It was as far as I'm concerned, it was a great trade-off. The byline for look, you can give me $100, that's fine, but give me my byline
right,
because
right.
10,000, 20,000 people might see that.
Yeah.
But
And it did help you when you walked into places and you used to carry the banner
sure.
of the newspaper, whatever that newspaper might be. And I've worked on
Absolutely.
newspapers from 1,200 circulation to 500,000 and more. But the byline and its reach can open doors for you, and that's important.
Yeah.
There aren't as many opportunities, I don't think, for people to develop those bylines. And
Well, I'll tell you what, man. Back in the day, a byline next to your picture was good for a free cup of coffee at any diner.
Yes.
Or occasionally having someone dump a cup of coffee on your head.
Exactly.
Oh,
Or wearing a cup of coffee, as the case may
no.
be.
Because
Amelia, I will give you the last round of questionings because I tell you what, this just was way too. Dan, before I turn it over to Amelia, can I get you back in a couple weeks?
I'd love to come back. Sure.
Yes. 'Cause we have
Beautiful.
more questions. and
I'm gonna. There's a little private chat over here. I'm gonna put a number in there,
Yes.
and I want you to take that, Dan.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Well, first, I kind of got like two questions. First of all, we
good.
we're fur baby lovers here, and I have to ask you about your dog Al Capone. Why you chose that name? And I see that you're into true
That's
crime.
easy because Al Capone was a killer.
I love that name though, but I see that you're into true crimes, like the Burger Chef murders that happened in 1978. What got you into that kind of true crimes?
Well, living out stories involving crime. I once Street Talk mentions a story I did about a guy who was a hitman who had a big heart, and he came to me instead of the cops, and we busted the crime before it happened, and kept the hit from being from occurring. But I was always around the edge of that, and so you mentioned the Burger Chef case.
Yes.
I am still working on that story. I brought a suspect forward in 1986 because of my prison reporting and my street life, and and I was on the inside of a police investigation then. The case remained unsolved, but now I'm working on a documentary film on what we hope will be a 10-part documentary series on this case and how police corruption was involved in these cases and led to these crimes not being solved.
Yeah.
So the in the course of all that, I've my home life has always had a little bit of normality to it, dogs and kids, and so
absolutely beautiful.
So I raised Labrador dogs for a while, and some of them went to be service dogs and things like that. But I had an accidental litter. It turned out a puppy down the road from me when I was living in Colorado. Got acquainted with my female Labrador and produced a litter of really cute, white, fluffy little Labrador lab puppies. And one of those pups was more Labrador than it was Golden Doodle. That was the other part of it. And so nobody picked that dog.
Oh.
Kept him, and he became the best dog I ever had. But we named him Al Capone because I was working on a book about the truth about Al Capone, which is that he never ran the Chicago mob, and that's one of our historic myths. The mob was run by a guy named Jake Guzik, who was a Russian Jew,
absolutely,
who was a genius, characterized in history as Al Capone's accountant. But
I have to have you on our other show, Dan, called Mob Talk.
Yes.
I have to have you on our other show called Mob Talk. Yeah. Well, here's my connection to the underworld. Okay. One of these I'm here today. I'm literally here today because of Mickey Cohen.
Really?
He gave my father the money for the surgery I needed when I was a kid.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow.
How about that shit?
Well, that sounds like a great story. I'd love to
It's
hear
a
more.
hell of a story. I'll tell you sometime on Mob Talk.
All right.
Let's do the lightning round, Dan. Okay.
Okay.
Popcorn or peanut brittle?
Peanut brittle if my teeth can take it.
Elvis or the Beatles?
The Beatles for sure.
Beautiful. Okay. Steak or hamburger?
It'd be hamburger.
I love this guy. Turning down a steak for American burger, baby.
That's right.
French fries or onion rings?
I'd have to go with French fries, but only the ones from that are truly called Thomas Frites. You know, they're the best in Paris. That's where to get them.
And finally, fruit juice or soda pop?
It'd have to be fruit juice.
There you go. Amelia,
Yes.
do you have a lightning round for Dan?
No. You
Okay,
did great.
we're gonna let him go. Dan, I will tell you what, brother. There is my numbers there on the side for you.
Right.
Give us. I have to have you back. I've got to have you back. We barely scratched the surface.
Yeah.
I said to Amelia before we started. I said, Neil, we're gonna have to do like a two-parter with Dan because this man's life is just so like full of character and just. There's just way too much life for an hour.
And he
So
said
I've got to give him another show.
He said this
But
was going to be a
in the
two-parter show.
What's that, Mel?
You said this was going to be a two-parter show. You said.
Oh yeah, I thought I said this has got to be a two-parter for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's been fun, and I've enjoyed it. I'd love to come back and do it again.
Man, we love having you here. Mel, what do we got coming up?
Tomorrow we have a tribute to professional wrestler Kevin Sullivan.
Kevin Sullivan, professional wrestler, passed away last week, and just a few days later, Amelia, what happened?
Sid Vicious, another professional wrestler, passed away.
2 pro wrestlers in 1 week.
Yes.
We are going to pay tribute to them with our professional wrestling expert, Doc Diamond. He will be here. He is a wrestling Hall of Famer. He is a pro wrestling Hall of Famer. You name it, the Doc has done it. He will be here. He's a dear friend of mine for 40 plus years. And Doc Diamond will walk us through the loss of Kevin Sullivan and Psycho Sid Vicious. And in the meantime, for Amelia, the Pitbull Chapman, I am Angelo, the Mad Dog DeCipio. For Dan Luzadder, Pulitzer Prize winning Dan Luzadder, we will see you again till next time, folks. Stay safe, stay cool, and never keep your mouth shut. God bless. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.